Hi everyone. Thank you, Lawrence, for inviting our Argentinian colleagues and talk to this important topic to all of us and to all of you. We're gonna have Felix Vicente as our guest. He's gonna present this topic of the political environment and challenges upcoming to the election results. Felix Vicente is an economist from the University of Buenos Aires, Universidad de Buenos Aires, and it's part of this research center on national economy. So it's also part of the local group, the Capital, Bajando Economía, which are also some of his members today. With anything else to add, I hand over to you, Felix.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Karen, Lawrence. Just a second. Can you see my screen there? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Rethinking Economics, for your support, for your interest in what's going on nowadays in Argentina. As soon as Javier Milei won the election, Rethinking Economics got in touch with us in order to do this presentation. So we really appreciate your support. Thank you very much also to my colleagues of the Américas Hoy and Bajando Economía. Bajando Economía is our local group here at the University of Buenos Aires. From that group, now we are creating CIEN as this new group that Karen mentioned in her introduction. That is part of the same group, but we are addressing like national topics in the agenda, not only our curriculum at the University of Buenos Aires, but also the issues regarding political economy at the national sphere. So yeah, thank you to CN as well. Okay, so democratic dissatisfaction, the Argentine experience. Who is Javier Milei? A bit of context first for those who don't know. It's funny because last year we were very famous because we won the football World Cup, and now we are sadly famous because of Javier Milei. In Spanish, we usually say like "la vida te da, la vida te quita." Like life sometimes presents good things and sometimes bad things. Well, today we have the bad one, which is Javier Milei. But anyway, 10 days ago, sorry, Argentina elected a right-wing anti-establishment politician who defined himself as an anarcho-capitalist with this weird rhetoric of destroying our central bank, destroying the central bank, making the US dollar legal tender. He denies climate change. He denies many fundamental human rights. He said that he hated the Pope Francisco, who is Argentina. He said like he's the devil on earth. He wants to freeze ties with Brazil and China, our two top trading partners. Brazil is, as you may know, is very important for us, for South America, and for the entire world in general. So it's a very new phenomenon here in Argentina. Maybe we can discuss later if that's new in the world, or at least in the Western Hemisphere, with figures such as Bolsonaro, Trump, etc. But for us, it's a very challenging phenomenon because democracy was something that all parties used to agree, no matter if they were like more center right wing or left wing. But nowadays, apparently, that consensus is over. Okay, so he did won the election with a difference of 11 points. So actually, he did a really, really good election. So the idea today is to discuss, well, who is him and what are the perspectives for Argentina regarding this new election and this new president that we currently have. So who is Javier Milei? Where does he come from? Because he's actually not a professional politician as we used to have before. He studied economics in the University of Belgrano, which is not a very famous university, not a very well-regarded university here in Buenos Aires. And he has built his career around the private sector, in banks and big companies, pension management funds, etc. And although he was a lecturer in some universities, for example, in my university as an assistant lecturer, he wasn't an academic. That wasn't his main activity. So he's like a sort of new phenomenon that is very attracting, and one of his main messages is I'm not a politician, right? I work in the private sector. I'm not corrupt because I'm not a politician, because in his rhetoric, being a politician equals to being corrupt. And since a very young age, people call him El Loco. Like the translation will be like a sort of crazy man. And he, I think, really likes to be called that way because of this strategy of provoking, intensifying conversations that we saw, for example, with Donald Trump before, and many other examples, of course. That's maybe the most popular one. So how did he enter to politics from apparently nowhere? Well, 8 years ago, he started appearing in talk shows with the very, very weird rhetoric, very violent rhetoric. It wasn't usual. We had a lot of like center right-wing journalists here in Argentina. Our media is really, really concentrated, but until that time, we just didn't have this kind of rhetoric on live TV. So his messages were like that we have been governed by corrupt left-wing Keynesians who only want to spend more, and we have to like sort of kick out Keynesians from the government because they are collectivist. And like everybody, no matter if it is from the right center, right wing or left wing, for him, everybody is Keynesian. Every politician is corrupt, and his main objective, he used to say in TV shows, were to kick them in the ass, literally. So what you can see here on the right is, for example, Javier Milei and El Consultorio de Milei. He actually had he went to the theater, and actually many people used to go to his shows where he used to do very, very violent things, such as destroying a central bank there in the middle of the theater. So he was an economist that was very, very attracting, and it was maybe the first time that economy that usually is people see like a sort of boring thing if you are not a specialist was for the first time very, very interesting, as you can see. And here you have a Milei shouting on live TV. But he's not too technical, of course, as it usually happens with this kind of figures. he goes to non-professional instances. He doesn't like to discuss with professional economists. He rather discuss with normal people, and he employs a lot of ad hominem fallacies, like to discussing personal issues, like you're corrupt, instead of discussing ideas, right? But this was very, very attracting in a context that is very bad for the Argentinian economy, as we are going to see later on in this presentation. So, as an economist, he always remarks that he's libertarian or anarcho-capitalist. And what's that, right? That's very weird. And it's actually weird even in our own curriculum at the University of Buenos Aires, that it's pretty mainstream, but it doesn't have an Austrian standpoint or an anarcho-capitalist standpoint as Milei has. So it was quite weird even for the establishment in economics here in Argentina, his idea, Milei's ideas, right? So as I mentioned before, he defines himself as an anarcho-capitalist that is influenced by Austrian economists such as Rothbard, Hayek, etc. And he has a sort of an extremist free market doctrine where state intervention is immoral in almost every situation. Like the government is a thief, taxes are a way of stealing, and it's immoral. So it's not mainstream economics, because he doesn't even recognize common phases such as externalities or public goods. Like state government is bad no matter what we're talking about. And that took him to propose very, very strange things, like a free market of human organs. Like, okay, if I have a kidney and I want to sell it, why not? He talked about privatizing rivers, because he says, like, okay, for example, if you have a contamination of a river, the main cause of it is that the river doesn't belong to nobody. So then nobody will try to stop that contamination. If we sell the river to somebody, let's say me, then I'll take care of that river, and I'll probably, I don't know, pay for security in order to avoid having people there or throwing out garbage, etc., etc. So his approach to contamination and global warming and stuff like that is that there is not enough free market in order to stop those problems. Same thing with public streets, and etc. So it was very, very weird. It is still very, very weird. Basically, this is my interpretation. He uses a concept of like negative liberty as a fundamental pillar, sorry. That is the absence of opposition or coaction for an individual to pursue his own actions. So I can do whatever I want, and I don't need the government to tell me what to do or to collect taxes and then spend in something that maybe I didn't want to spend. Like the government won't ever know what are my preferences. So then I should spend my own money. And for example, if I want that river to be clean, then maybe I can buy it and take care of it. If I don't, well, then the river might be contaminated. If there's no scarcity, the river will be actually contaminated. So as you see, it's very weird, and it's like taking the microeconomic fundamentals to a very, very extremist doctrine. And his standpoint for this political issues that we are in the institutions that we are currently facing is that the main contradiction is politicians versus people. So as usually Margaret Thatcher, actually, many years ago, said like, the main contradiction is people that work 8 hours a day and they're honest and etc. And politicians that are all corrupt. They are addicted to taxes and public spending in order to preserve their situation, having very high salaries and things like that. So please vote a normal person like you. I'm not a politician. I'm going to destroy this privilege that politicians are currently having. And he names, and this is very interesting, these politicians and businessmen who are related to these politicians as the caste. Like there will be a sort of caste that only preserve their privilege, no matter if they are center right or center left. And we need an outsider to destroy that thing that is going on in Argentina. So, for example, the Congress, it's a bad thing because they do agree on whatever they want, and then we are all worse and worse. That would be the main political idea that Milei is bringing on the table right now. And in terms of his economic ideas applied for Argentina, he says that fiscal deficit is the main reason for the Argentinian economic crisis. We are going to talk about that later, but we are currently facing a huge economic crisis, and he's saying that the main problem is the fiscal deficit, where if you spend more than what you collect with taxes, then you will have inflation in a very basic monetarist standpoint. Like inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, such as Friedman said. Well, that's his standpoint. And the closure of our central bank in Argentina and the dollarization of our economy is our second best. What does he mean with second best? Okay, well, since we can't have our own currency because the governments will always be addicted to public spending and we will always have fiscal deficit, well then, if you dollarize your economy, you don't have more sovereignty for your monetary policies, and then you won't have inflation. Okay, I'm trying to show you what he is saying and what he thinks. And his main proposal was to, in the short term, cut spending by 15%. So many of us today are economists. We do know that that's crazy, that's delusional. But he said, and this is very interesting, that that fiscal cut will be paid by politicians, not by the people. And that's very strong. And people, now we know, believed in that premise. Like you can cut 15% of your social spending, but only to end corruption without, cutting pensions. We do know that that's crazy, but look at that. Look at that. Oh, sorry. Look at that image, like Milei 2023. He's with a chainsaw. I think that's the name in English of this. And he was like everywhere he goes with a chainsaw, like saying, I'm gonna cut spending by 15%. And people said, okay, that's right. I want to vote to this guy. Okay. But because he's going to cut politicians' salaries and corruption, and as I mentioned before, not social spending in hospitals, in education, etc. In terms of international affairs, he says that Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, of course, are one of the great leaders in the history of humanity. And he also says that he will be aligned with the free world, that the free world would be Israel, and the US. And for example, one of his proposals is to move the Argentinian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, supporting Israeli campaign in Gaza, etc., etc. And this is very weird. He wants to freeze diplomatic relations with Brazil and China, two very, very important countries, because they are our main trading partners, because they're communist. And actually, if you if you know about what's going on in Brazil, Lula is not communist at all. He's not just extreme right as Bolsonaro was. But anyway, he's communist. And and every single politician here in Argentina before him is communist as well. This is kind of rhetoric he usually uses. And of course, he has a more active military approach to conflict. Argentina, since we recovered our democracy, we don't have a strong military approach to conflicts, but unfortunately, it seems that we will. And in an economic crisis, we will probably spend more in our military. Milei in human rights, as I mentioned before, we returned to democracy 40 years ago after a bloody military dictatorship. The same happened in many other countries of Latin America. I can give you examples like Pinochet. In Chile, in Argentina, we had many dictators. One of them was Jorge Rafael Videla. And many people disappeared, and we say disappear because we don't know where they are. Nobody never said where they are, so they are just disappeared. Artists, activists, very young people that were in their secondary school and they were activists, they were killed or disappeared by our dictatorship. And for the first time, Milei is trying to say that it is not a genocide, it was a war, right? Like you have the government, a dictatorship, and guerrillas in the same like two parts of a war, like in equal terms. And of course, it wasn't that. It was a genocide. It's like saying like the Nazis and Jewish were it was a war. Of course, it wasn't. And his vice president is known to come from a military family involved in our military dictatorship. So she raised many times on TV the possibility of pardoning genocidal figures multiple times because they are in jail right now, fortunately. And finally, regarding our future, the right to strike is being questioned with threats of severe repression that usually that doesn't happen much in Argentina. Maybe that's more common in Chile or in Brazil, but not in Argentina. And now we will probably face a new situation regarding repression. So you might be asking, like, how could this guy win the election? To be honest, I don't really know yet, but I will try to give some reflections about this. And one of my main reflections are the economic dissatisfaction that Argentina's people in Argentina here currently have.
Eh? Go to the bedroom. Is the
Sorry.
door closed?
Okay. So stagflation and the IMF debt, we call stagflation at this situation of not having our economic growing. We are flat in terms of growing, and we also have very, very high. Can you hear me? Yeah. So one of the main economic problems that we have in Argentina is that we had a lot of external debt. With the presidential term of Mauricio Macri, we got a foreign debt crisis, of a crisis of our balance of payment in 2018. And now we have the IMF with us. We borrowed the biggest IMF's debt in his history. It's more than 50% of the international organization's portfolio. So we are currently having severe problems with the IMF. And the IMF puts a lot of conditionalities to our economic growth and development, because, of course, it has also this fiscal approach where if you want to grow and if you want to develop your country, you have to cut spending, right? But we had the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have a great drought. In Argentina, we produce and we export a lot of soybean, corn, etc. So the drought was very, very problematic, and we actually had more fiscal deficit. So the IMF was threatening us, saying that if we didn't cut spending, they would default our debt. And that leads us to having a 30% bond parity for our Argentinian bonds denominated in dollars. And that's a situation that it's similar to the parity bonds that Ukraine or Venezuela are currently having. So that you can dimension the economic crisis that Argentina is facing nowadays, and the context, especially the context in which Milei is winning this election. These are our annual inflation rates. So as you can see now, we are in 143% inflation, and we face a sort of risk of hyperinflation, such as what happened in the Weimar Republic in Germany almost 100 years ago. Not less, 80 years ago. So as you can see, our inflation is dementia. And if you then have a candidate who says, okay, by cutting spending, I'll stop this, or by dollarizing, using the US dollar as our new currency, I will stop this inflation, it may be appealing. It may be interesting for the people, because someone has to do something, because as you can see, this is after the COVID-19 pandemic, the inflation went to really, really high rates. Maybe because of the inflation, of course, real wages are going down, and we hadn't recovered yet from the pandemic. So people are having a very, very bad time, and we have around 45% poverty rates right now. Argentina didn't used to have these rates of poverty before, so it's like a sort of a new social structure that is arising, and it's very new because of this economic problems that we are facing and we have been facing for at least 10 years from now. Well, same thing with employment and our rates in terms of growth. And finally, I would like to, discuss some final reflections with you and regarding this economic dissatisfaction that we're facing now. Does Argentinian people believe in these ideas? Did people read Hayek or Rothbard, or really think that a river should be privatized and stuff like that? Well, actually, no. What I do think is that we are still saying, okay, this is the 40th anniversary of our democracy and stuff like that. But actually, during our democratic period, many variables are going down. So if you do have democracy, but then you can't afford a dinner with your children, maybe you want an extreme change. And that's pretty rational. That's pretty rational. And like, what happens? The following question is, what happens to democracy when inequality grows? Same thing happened with Bolsonaro. And usually this kind of ideas arise in a very problematic context. Brazil was in recession when Bolsonaro won the general election, like 6 years ago, I think. So I think the main discussion that we are facing today is, okay, many people will say, if this is democracy, I don't like it, I want to change. And what I think we should do, and what we will try to do in the following 4 years, which is the term that will be governed by Javier Milei, is to say that we need more democracy, not less democracy. And what do I mean by more democracy? Well, more democracy could be a fiscal reform. More democracy could be discussing our economic curriculum. More democracy could be creating new universities. More democracy is taking down our poverty rates. And that's the main discussion that we need to face. And that's our challenge. Of course, it's very hard because we have the media that is against us. And actually, in the public debate, this fiscal cause of our inflation actually won, and we will have to discuss it. I personally don't think that in the following months, because of this fiscal cutting, we'll have less inflation. I think that we will have more inflation, and we will be there to discuss these ideas from an heterodox perspective. But finally, if political stability is a challenge in terms of political economy, like if you don't change these variables, if you don't take down poverty, if you don't solve inflation within democracy, then you will have institutional problems. So then democracy will be an economic concept to address. If we don't solve our economic problems, our political institutions will be weaker and weaker, and at least in the Western Hemisphere, sadly, this will continue to happen, no matter what happens in Argentina in the 4 years. Like maybe a left-wing government wins again, but if people are not satisfied with our democracy, this could happen again and again. So I think what Rethinking Economics is doing with what all local groups around the globe are doing is by discussing inequality, by discussing the economic curricula, preserving democracy. Maybe we failed with that this time, but we're going to discuss it, and that's our challenge in the future. So, gracias. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Felix. If anyone got questions, please drop it in the chat or raise your hand. But if you're gonna ask him directly, please just keep it brief. In the meantime, I would like to ask you something about, and if you can give us a bit more context on more the political background and his political alliance with the ex-president Mauricio Macri, and how that could impact into the things that he can do, like how much of these policies can be actually do much harm, how many of them can be done, and also the part of political, resistance from the workers' unions or political activists, students, how those factors are in the field.
Well, that's a great question, Karen. Thank you very much. Because as you can see, this is very eclectic. The Milei's ideas. So the next question is, how is he going to govern, right? Because okay, you can during campaign you can say many things, but then it's actually hard to govern, especially if you are an outsider, right? With a new party. It's not like Trump with a Republican Party that he got into that party, but it's a new party with very weak representation in our Congress. So after he won the election, he did an alliance with Mauricio Macri, former president of Argentina between 2015 and 2019, which used to be a sort of center-right proposal, but now they are in a very strong alliance with Javier Milei, and actually Mauricio Macri is forming the economic technical people, and he's putting the Ministry of Economy of Milei's government. So it's weird because Macri's party participated in the election. He got the third place in the election, but however, once Milei won, he did this alliance. So it's kind of weird in terms of democratic standards, right? The third party in the election is deciding the main economic ideas, and actually Milei is moderating his ideas of, for example, dollarization, because he knows that we can't do a dollarization here in Argentina right now because we don't have enough dollars in our central bank. So what we expect from that alliance is to be a little bit more stronger in the Congress, because La Libertad Avanza, which is the name of the party of Milei, is very weak because it's a new party. So with this alliance, he might have more, he will be stronger in order to pass some laws for example, privatize public companies, or for example, to cut pensions in 10% and stuff like that. That's new. We didn't know that before. And we are trying to show this because Mauricio Macri and this party that Milei chose in order to govern is not well seen here in Argentina. So he waited to win in order to announce this alliance with Macri, sorry. And we are trying to show that this idea of fighting the caste or fighting politicians was false. We all knew that was false, and now he's showing how he is doing this alliance with many politicians that were very corrupt and have been in the public sphere for many years. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a related questions to it from Eric Decker, who says, is the Congress responsible for deciding policies and in state laws approve, spending cuts, or Milei can push through it himself?
That's a great question. We don't know yet what the center right, let's say. It's very hard to put a label on it, but what many deputies? No, yeah, the people from the Congress will do regarding this alliance with Milei. We don't know yet if they will be able to send these laws to the Congress. And it's in terms of democratic stability, it's a very important question. But because what happens if we are facing towards a hyperinflation and he doesn't have enough support in the Congress? We saw in other experience and in many very hard times in South America, how the Congress is shut down in order to privatize companies or do fiscal cuts and stuff like that. We don't know. Of course, I'm not saying that he is going to do that because I really don't know. But it's an uncertain situation here. Having a government, having a president that has very, very weak representation in the Congress. We do have, by constitution, a figure which is called decreto. Do you know, Karen, the translation of decreto? Because I don't.
Decree.
Decreed.
Decree.
Okay, there we go. So you can pass over laws without going to the Congress, but I think that will be very problematic because it weakens democracy. So we will see. And the other way of doing so is by moderating his proposals and not cutting spending, and as he said during his campaign. But if he can't pass any law, then it will be very, very difficult for him to govern as well. So we will see. It's a very unusual situation what we are facing now. It's very new for us.
Another two by the chat, and then moving on to Sinan and Vinayakan, who has raised their hand. One of is, will he defund economic departments? As an attack of academic freedom, historically, let's say left or more not aligned to this view. What can you and we as a network do? And other more general, from Lawrence, maybe like why inflation came up to this bad in Argentina. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's a hard one, but let's go with the first one. What Milei does usually is he doesn't say, okay, I don't agree with you, but saying like, okay, you're a crap, you're a socialist, I'm gonna, shut down all your universities and stuff like that. He's very violent, at least in his rhetoric. So regarding free speech and things like that in universities, we don't know. I hope he doesn't interfere with our curriculum. And actually, our universities are autonomous. It's not the president who decides what to do in the university. Universities have a council, and usually universities, at least the public ones in Argentina, don't agree with what Milei is proposing. Even mainstream economic departments that know that the closure of the central bank is nonsense. So, as I mentioned before, it's a very, very uncertain and weird situation what you're facing now. I don't expect the closure of public universities, but we can't affirm that. It is important to say that Milei will be actually the president in 10 days. We are still in transition, so really we don't know. And about inflation in Argentina, we are having inflation. We have had inflation for over the last say 20 years, high inflation in Argentina. But to make it short, I think that the balance of payment crisis that we faced in 2018 and the return of the IMF to Argentina is currently being a very, very problematic situation because we don't have reserves and we do have to pay the IMF a lot of money. So what people see is that if there are no dollars in order to pay the IMF, if there's scarcity of dollars, then the rates, the dollars in terms of pesos, go higher and higher, and no one believes in the Argentinian peso. And that's very reasonable, since you have a candidate who said that that peso is a crap, is a piece of shit, and he said it this way. So then the demand of pesos goes down, and that's inflation. That's actually what happened in Germany during the Weimar Republic. So that would be one possible answer to what's going on today.
Sinan, Vinaya can just a note on be brief on your questions. If you want to go first, Sinan, and then Vinaya can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Above all, I really want to thank you for this informative and well-prepared presentation. If you let me, I want to make some contribution as well, apart from my question, actually. As I understand from different sources and references, Milei idea of dollarization and closure of the central bank is based on the fixed exchange rate system, like during the gold standard, which was the main international monetary system between 1870 and 1914, pre-First World War era. Additionally, he also takes into consideration Hayek's free banking suggestion. Although it's highly likely that the transition to the US dollar for usage in the domestic market will have the effect of importing the domestic inflation in the US market, as in the glut dollar period of Bretton Woods system. Do you agree with that?
Could you repeat only your last question? What's the question?
Milei idea is based on gold standard period.
No, I know. Yeah. But what did you say after that?
And also, my second question, transition to the US dollar for usage in domestic market creates additional inflation due to domestic inflation in the US market. Actually, two questions. Do you agree with them?
Great, thank you. Well, regarding the first question, it's more, I would say, than a fixed exchange rate, because we did have during the 90s fixed exchange rate 1-to-1. So 1 Argentinian peso was 1 US dollar, but we still had a central bank, and we still had pesos, which is our national currency. By having the US dollar as a currency, then it's more than a fixed exchange rate. You wouldn't have a central bank, because actually what happened during the 90s is that you had to have dollars in your central bank, and then you can print pesos, let's say, and then you have that dollars in order to preserve this exchange rate. By having US dollar without pesos, then you wouldn't need a central bank. So it would be a bit more aggressive, let's say. And it's very problematic, because then you can't go back to another system, because in Argentina, people had pesos, even though it was a fixed exchange rate of 1-to-1. So then if you devaluate your currency and you fix other exchange rate, okay, so then you don't have that fixed exchange rate anymore. But if you dollarize your economy, it will be very hard for you to go back to the pesos, because nobody would eventually want pesos. You see, so that's maybe a problem that is facing today Ecuador, for example. We know that some governments, such as Rafael Correa's government, didn't want dollarization. But however, it's very, very hard to go back to their currency, which was sucres. Good. And then regarding the inflation in the US and stuff like that, we do know that if you have to devaluate a lot your currency, if you fix a very, very high exchange rate in order to dollarize your economy because you don't have enough dollars and you have to buy all the pesos that you have in the economy, then you will have inflation in dollars, very high inflation, which is not related to the inflation that the US is currently facing right now. For example, Ecuador in 2000, the year where when they dollarized their economy, had 24% inflation rates in dollars, not in sucres, in dollars. But then eventually that inflation rates went down, and finally, like after 4 or 5 years, they started having the same inflation or similar inflation to the one of the US economy. So I would say that in the first years, if you dollarize your economy, you will have a higher inflation in comparison with the US inflation, but eventually, after a couple of years, you will converge to similar rates. Those rates are around 4%, and they are 4, 5, 3. They want to keep it in 2% in the next 4 years, and that's much less than what we have now, that is 150%, and it will get higher. So the main problem of dollarization is not inflation after 4 or 5 years, but the other problems that dollarization has, that is basically that you don't have your own monetary policy, and the US, the Federal Reserve, will decide what to do for what's best for the US and not for Argentina. But Argentina can't decide what the US does in terms of interest rates and things like that. And I think that's the main problem, especially regarding the economic conflict with China. They will decide things, and of course they won't ask Argentina what to do, and maybe what they do is not the best for Argentina, and that's pretty okay. But the problem is that Argentina decided not to have an independent monetary policy. So I wouldn't say that inflation in the long run is the problem of dollarization, but the lack of independent monetary policy in order to foster development.
Yeah, I understand. I'll be as brief and pointed as possible. I have three points to present. Three doubts. So you mentioned he follows the ideas of Friedman and Hayek, but he doesn't refer to their ideas of libertarian redistribution. Like Hayek has talked about the idea of certain minimum income to every individual in his book Law, Legislation, and Liberty. Similarly, Milton Friedman has extensively talked about the idea of negative income tax. So this is to maintain a minimum level of income to every citizen to have a free society. So Milei is not talking about these ideas. That's first question. Secondly, my question is regarding his ideology. So I have beautiful slides, really beautiful slides. But I think one point which was missing, to refer him like a Trump-like president, how can we do that? Because I don't see any conservative values he's adopting. He's against the Pope. He's pro-LGBT, I guess, in some sense. So I don't understand where we can draw the parallels. Thirdly, regarding the theory you just presented regarding the privatization of rivers, I guess it's a Coursian theory rather than the theories by these people you referred to. So but I don't know if that was tested out before to see if the Coursian idea of internalizing externality or that kind of an idea has ever been tested out. So wouldn't it be cool to test it out once and see if that works as a solution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Okay, let's take the first one. No, of course he doesn't talk about minimum wage, or not minimum wage, but this universal salary I think he takes these liberal ideas as a sort of doctrine. I mean, for example, he says that Adam Smith was a great economist, the father of liberalism and stuff like that. And he sells Adam Smith as a person who only wanted to privatize things and who only thought that free market is the way of having a better economy and stuff like that. And we do know now that Adam Smith was much more interesting and did mention many other things about the problems of inequality, and he discussed with Rousseau and things like that. Well, the same thing happened with Hayek and with Rothbard. He only takes what he thinks it might be attracting without a very developed academic, honest way of approaching to the Austrian economists, who are really, really interesting, actually. For example, especially, I would say Karl Menger. So no, he doesn't talk about that. He only takes the free market anarcho-capitalism ideas that fit in this rhetoric, and only that. Regarding Trump, of course, it's not the same, and we really don't know what he actually is going to do in Argentina. Maybe the comparison or the parallel was this idea of being someone that is not in politics, is a businessman with a very violent rhetoric, and because he doesn't, he's not a politician, he is going to like sort of fix this corrupt system, and the laws are all corrupt because the Congress is corrupt, and this kind of ideas where you have a crazy man with a very violent rhetoric, which is very attracting because it is. You should try to see his interviews. It's very attracting, very violent, and I would say that maybe we can have a parallel in that sense, but only in that sense. Then we will see what does Milei do with our economy. And then the third thing you said, like we should see, like Argentina is going to be an experiment. Well, we don't know what is going to happen, as I mentioned before, but we do know that he's moderating his ideas. For example, he now says that dollarization is not something that will happen in the near future. And why? Because he knows that today that's impossible, and that would destroy even more our peso. That would mean higher inflation rates. And it's easy to say it when you are in campaign, but once you are in the government, having higher inflation rates, because nobody wants pesos if you're going to dollarize the economy, it's problematic. So I don't think that we will have a sort of libertarian way of managing economy. I think that his alliance with the traditional right wing in Argentina will mean more debt with the IMF, more fiscal cut, and then I don't know what's next. Yeah.
Thank you, Felix. Just to close this up, and thanks everyone for coming and listen to us and showing interest. Just gonna wrap it up, and now I'm gonna rush you a bit into saying por sí or por no. If you think of a question of Femke, if you think that the free trade with Brazil and China was just ideological, like purely ideological, in opposition to communism, or has something behind it, and the other, if you can point three things, couple things of the current government, the progressive governments that could have led into their victory, and what would they need to do? to recover into that political awareness and gain the favor of the people again? Just really
Okay,
quick.
sure. So, well, cutting ties with Brazil and China is purely ideological, because if you think about it, that goes against free trade, especially regarding our two main trade partners. So I don't actually think that will happen, because that would collapse our economy. I don't think he's going to close the embassy, the Argentinian embassy in Brazil, because Brazil is very, very important for us. It's the main economy in Latin America with Mexico. But I think he did that because well, now he is a politician. It's very hard to say that he's not a politician, but he actually doesn't know much about diplomatic issues. And then during his campaign, saying that everybody's communist, everybody's corrupt, and stuff like that, he said, okay, China is communist, so because it's communist, it's corrupt, I won't talk with them. And now that he's in the government, he probably will realize that that's actually impossible. So yeah, I would say that it's purely ideological what he did, and quite a confusion, right? And then regarding this government is a very important question. I think what we had during these 4 years is a combination of very adverse circumstances because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because of our drought that I mentioned before. But for Argentina's economy, having a drought it's very, very, very problematic, since more than 80% of our exports is of soya, beans, and corn, etc., etc. But we also committed some mistakes, since our coalition was very fragile. There were a lot of controversies inside this coalition, that we could say that it was a Peronist or center-left, if you want, coalition, and it haven't been a pragmatic and operative coalition. It had a lot of problems inside, and that combined with a very, very bad context was very problematic. So I would say that, yeah, the context plus many errors that politicians inside the coalition have committed were a very problematic combo, and that led us to Milei winning the election today, 10 days ago, I would say.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Felix, todos los de Bajando Economía. Gracias por venir. Thank you all. See you.
Well, thank you very much. Bye-bye.